Hello and welcome. This is CYS596 Capstone Project in Cybersecurity. Module 8, Assignment 1, Final Presentation. My name is Jonathan Adviento, and the instructor for this course is Dr. Liz Stovall. Of course, this part of the PowerPoint presentation will eventually include a link to this presentation that I'm recording, and it'll be on this slide. Okay, so the topic of this presentation is security breaches and how security controls can prevent them. For our scope for today, we will discuss one of the more common end goals of a security breach, which is a data breach. To provide more context into the effects of a data breach, we will do a case study on the Target data breach of 2013. We will not focus too much on the incident response and how that was handled, but rather we will look into security controls and how that could have mitigated problems that were seen during this incident. And to do our analysis, we're going to look at security controls from the SANS top 20 critical security controls and OWASP top 10. To bring things together, we will discuss how risk assessment can aid in the development of those controls, which we'll see here in a moment that that's what Target did. It was to use a risk assessment. We're going to draw from NIST 800 TAC 30. We're also going to discuss how risk assessments are important for the security risk management lifecycle of an enterprise. And then last but not least, we will discuss the importance of security culture in conjunction with security controls to ensure that security posture of an enterprise remains consistent or stays consistent. All right, so our first topic, data breaches. What is a data breach? Well, a security breach and data breaches are names that have been used interchangeably. There's a slight difference between the two. The security breach is technically the first step to a data breach. Both a security breach and a data breach imply that the attacker who is not authorized to access your network or your portion of the network, because remember, attackers can be internal or within the organization itself, but they have infiltrated the network to perform some sort of malicious act. The data breach itself is the final act where sensitive data has been taken, viewed, or used by an attacker. Using a data breach as an example is a little bit easier to quantify, or it's easier to quantify loss in the amount of dollars and time than a security breach. So historically, public disclosure of data breaches began to increase in the 1980s. Remember that even though computers were used professionally, a data breach does not require data to be taken from a digital source, and that makes it a little bit more relatable because we can span a little bit more than just digital, even though digital is our primary concern in this course. Due to the rise of data breaches, federal laws have started to at the time, to be passed to meet the issue on a national scale. For industry-specific laws like HIPAA was introduced in 1996, or the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act for the financial industry in 1999. So the reasons for, or the motivations for a data breach depends on the attacker. They could be after PCI, payment card information, PHI, private health information, PII, personal identifiable information, trade secrets, or intellectual property. An attacker may seek a way to gain access to your network. They may deploy methods like malware to automate actions like moving across the network, preparing for exfiltration, offloading them to offsite servers, things like that. Data lost will do more damage than the amount of time trying to mitigate them or recover from the attack. So the three methods, or the three common methods of trying to get into the network to begin with. Again, we mentioned malware, but also phishing and social engineering, which we'll discuss here in a little bit. Now the impact, again, as I mentioned, data loss will cause more than just the initial cost to mitigate or recover from the attack. The public may lose faith in the brand, so there's a brand loyalty issue, and they will leave for its competitors. There's going to be a lot of time and resource lost from legal, the loss of clients, and whenever you're in recovery mode, what are you not doing? You're not working. You're not doing your primary function of the business. So all that adds up. The average cost of a single breach in the United States is $8.19 million per breach. But let's so we're going to segue into our case study here. So Target, and I'm sure most of us have heard of the Target breach, but there was a loss of 41 million customers' personal credit card information, or PCI. To give you some numbers to show the magnitude of the impact, the lawsuit alone for this breach was $18.5 million, and this was paid out to Target customers that could prove that they were personally impacted by this data breach. And remember earlier I had mentioned that the average cost of a breach in the United States is $8.19 million. Well, as you can see, this cost of $18.5 million doesn't even include time lost. It doesn't include the cost that Target paid for assessment, mitigation, recovery, equipment, trying to regain their clients back, all brand loyalty, all of those things. The data breach also had a bit of a controversy surrounding it, further damaging the brand name and forced the CEO to resign. So for timeline, the attack itself started on November 27th of 2013, and it was caught in early of December, and it was fully mitigated on December 15th, 2013. This may not seem like a long period of time, but remember the attackers made off with 41 million people's personal financial information. And if you look at the time frame, they specifically chose Black Friday, where more transactions were likely to occur than the rest of the year. So they were very, very strategic about that. So how did the attackers perform this breach? So instead of performing a phishing or social engineering attack directly on a Target team member, which would have been easy, and I'll discuss that a little bit later, to avoid direct attention, the attackers chose to find a secondary means to get in. The vendor portal was ultimately chosen. It is not known exactly how many target vendors were targeted, but it only took one. The vendor's name that was compromised was a HVAC company named Phasio Mechanical. And this was done via a phishing email. A Trojan named Citadel was used to acquire Phasio Mechanical vendor credentials into the target network. And by this time in history, the Citadel Trojan was already known, but due to an outdated anti-malware software, the attack on Phasio Mechanical to gain their credentials was successful. From this point, the attackers escalated their credentials to administrator level, and they moved laterally across the network into the point of sale or the POS system of target. So the point of sale system would be where you slide your card to make a payment. Malware was installed that was designed to capture the personal card information from the point of sale systems at individual stores. So think about how much not only physical distance, but the network distance to move from a vendor portal of the network to the point of sale system of an individual store. To avoid detection, data was only moved between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. local time to the point of sale system of that particular store. And once a batch of data was ready, a dump server was used to transfer data off of the target network, and a total of 11 gigabytes of data was exfiltrated. And the 11 gigabytes of data translates to the 41 million people's personal card information. After the attack, an assessment was performed by an outside company, an outside security company named Verizon. And the assessment itself lasted 3 months, and their findings included weak passwords that led to an 86% success rate for cracking passwords. So as far as the actual numbers, they were able to crack 472,308 user passwords out of 547,470 employees. And they did that in 1 week. Many of the passwords were either too weak or they were the default ones that were given to the employees when they were created. The scary part of this is that the weak password usage included those accounts with administrator privilege. Now, of course, there probably wasn't a way for the attackers to have known this directly. They could have done their phishing attack directly on a target team member, escalate their privilege within the network and do all that at target directly, but in order to avoid detection, I believe that's why they chose Phasio Mechanical, as mentioned earlier. Poor patching practices also allowed. Oh, actually, I forgot about that. So the poor patching practices allowed Verizon to duplicate the full network access, same as we had mentioned. Now, the last major finding was that 1,800 locations were affected. So think about this: at 1,800 locations in the United States, this malware was installed at the POS system, the point of sale system, and in this short amount of time, that's how they were able to collect the 11 gigabytes of data. Lessons learned. So what did Target learn from this? Target had a password policy in place, for one, and this is proof that policy alone is not a solution, because in practice, even at an administrator level, Target employees were using weak passwords. So Target, after this assessment, had and some of the improvements that they have made are obviously a direct reflection of the assessment. So they made improvements to monitoring and logging. They placed network access limitations to limit vendor access to the network, which of course was the attack vector to get in. They overhauled privileges. They whitelisted the point of sale system, so that was based on a need to know. You know, they only gave access to the point of sale system only if the permissions and the authorizations were for that use case only. There were other ones that I didn't list on here. And they changed some firewall rules. They made use of two-factor authentication. They improved password training, required password rotation. So these are all if you think about it, these are all security controls. These were all done with the mind of improving security posture, as these methods are actionable methods that are directly related to cyber defense. Of course, the ad hoc method, which this is, they're reacting to an incident, that no longer works, and it cost them a lot of money. I don't know about you, but I don't have $18.5 million to pay out just in case my security was not up to par. And though an assessment is one way to derive security controls, let's discuss two other methods. Excuse me. So the SANS Top 20 Critical Controls, they were developed to provide a immediately usable, actionable method for cyber defense, as mentioned before. So these are actual controls that can be immediately applied. Apologize, I just kicked the camera here. They were developed with the combined experience and knowledge of organizations like the NSA, the U.S. Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and other top forensic organizations. If you already have a security network and controls are in place, you could still use them. You would have to perform a gap assessment to determine where you need to add controls, and then the next step would be to develop a plan to integrate them into your system, and then repeat the cycle as security challenges and new threats come about. So let's take a look at the list. It might be a little bit hard to see on camera, but I'll read them out to you real quick. So the first one, inventory and control of hardware assets. Number 2, inventory and control of software assets. Number 3, continuous vulnerability management. Number 4, controlled use of administrative privileges. Number 5, secure configuration for hardware and software on mobile devices, laptops, workstations, and servers. Number 6, maintenance, monitoring, and analysis of audit logs. Number 7, email and web browser protections. Number 8, malware defenses. Number 9, limitation and control of network ports, protocols, and services. Number 10, data recovery capabilities. Number 11, secure configuration for network devices such as firewalls, routers, and switches. Number 12, boundary defense. Number 13, data protection. Number 14, controlled access based on the need to know. Number 15, wireless access control. Number 16, account monitoring and control. Number 17, implement a security awareness and training program. Number 18, application software security. Number 19, incident response and management. Number 20, penetration tests and red team exercises. So, now many of these controls may sound familiar, as some of these were determined to be needed and used in the target assessment, and they were deployed. So let's cross-reference these a little bit. So some of the improvements that were made at Target include improved monitoring and logging. That would be Control 6. And remember, Control 6 was maintenance, monitoring, and analysis of audit logs. And then number 16, account monitoring and control. So one of the important things about that is that if with the accounts, they were not taking into consideration or monitoring who was allowed to have administrative privilege. How are they able to escalate their privilege to administrator level without being noticed? You know, if you had taken an inventory of how many accounts were supposed to have them, you have 10, and then all of a sudden you have 11. If you don't have any controls in place to challenge that and say, wait a second, you know, why do we have 11 administrator privilege accounts? Did something change? And then, you know, who granted them authorization? Was it authorized? All these other things. The whitelisting of the point of sale systems, that would be Control 13, data protection. You're wanting to segregate or separate that system and only give those who need access to that system access, which is also number 14, controlled access based on need to know. Target also placed limitations on vendor access to their network, which is, again, that's also number 14, controlled access based on the need to know. Someone in the vendor system shouldn't need any access or control over the point of sale system because they're totally not related. One of the other ones was that Target improved password training and rotation requirements, which is number 17. So 17 reads, implement a security awareness and training program. And that's a part of the governance and security training, security culture, which we'll talk about at the end, is that, remember, Target had a password policy in place, but without training their employees on what types of passwords to use, how often it needs to be done, and then of course placing controls on the password usage itself, requiring numbers, special characters, certain lengths, not including dates or names, things like that. So there are controls that could have been put in place to ensure that not only the Target team members were aware, but also they wouldn't have a choice but to use a strong password, and preventing them from logging in using a default password. You know, only allowing default password to be used once, and then the second attempt to log in, forcing them to change their password. These are simple things that could have been done. Okay, so we're going to move on to the OWASP top 10, which I consider to be a little bit reverse mentality of the SANS top 12, because remember, the SANS top 12, or 12, the SANS top 20 was controls that were just given to you. You can immediately take these and apply them to your organization, whereas the OWASP top 10, they give you a list of high risk web application, the risks that exist in web application or their vulnerabilities, and you can use this list to develop security controls from. during the development of vulnerability scenarios, they were submitted by over 500 application security experts, and they were narrowed down to a list of top 10. Or they were organized and then narrowed down to a list of top 10. The intent of the list was to educate and inform the user of a list of consequences of the most common vulnerabilities that already exist. And as you can see on the slide, they were based on exploitability, detectability, and their impact. Okay, and here's the list. So the list reads injection, broken authentication, sensitive data exposure, XML external entities, broken access control, security misconfiguration, cross-site scripting, insecure deserialization, unknown vulnerabilities, and log monitoring. Now, a few stand out here that are related to the target case study that we went through. The broken authentication, through the mismanagement of identity and access controls, the attackers were able to compromise the entire system by gaining access to one account and escalating their privilege. The way to fix that, you can use, in general, in order to fix that, you can use two-factor and multi-factor authentication, using strong passwords. Those are methods to prevent the vulnerability specifically, not just in the target case. But obviously that addresses the weak password problem that was found at Target. Number 3, sensitive data exposure. That's another one that stuck out to me. The way that data was exposed was that they were able to capture data in transit, and regardless of how the attackers got it, they got it. And one of the things I don't think I mentioned earlier was that the data itself was not encrypted. Encryption, even though it doesn't prevent an attacker from taking the information, it's the last layer. It's the last layer of protection, because it'll give the victims more time. If you think about it, like when data is not encrypted, it is immediately usable by the attacker. Versus if all that data, the 41 million people's data was encrypted, it gives Target more time to properly notify their clients. It gives the clients more time to respond to it, put protections in place, cancel their credit cards, put credit monitoring in place before the data is even usable, because it takes time to break that encryption. Versus it's kind of like the example I gave earlier on passwords, right? Imagine if you were trying to access this system and there were no passwords in place. You could just walk right up, turn on the system, use it, walk away. Versus the password provides another layer, just like encryption adds another layer. Another one that sticks out to me, broken access control. Access control could be it could be used to keep a user separated or segregated into their sections, and you only give them permission to access what they need to know, which is similar to It's similar to the SANS Top 20 because, I mean, to be brutally honest, someone who's an HVAC vendor has zero business in the point of sale system. So you should be able to know, well, what is this account? What is the purpose of this account? Well, the purpose of this account is in the vendor system. Well, regardless of whether or not they have administrative privilege in the vendor system, why do they have administrative privilege, or how did they gain administrative privilege in the point of sale system? You know, thinking about it and talking about it out loud, it makes sense, but if there's no controls in place, they can pretty much, that's how they were able to move across without being noticed, which is also a security misconfiguration. Number 6. There wasn't, it seems like there wasn't a thought process there to even classify information. I mean, they had a point of sale system, they had a vendor system, sure, but the whole point of separating them in the system is so that you can implement permissions to access that system. And if you don't properly separate them, or even separate them completely, having a totally separate network, how are they able? They wouldn't be able to jump from one to the other if they were either separated or segregated within the network itself. Another one would be unknown vulnerabilities, number 9. So that's another big one. Both Phasio Mechanical and Target were guilty of poor patching practices. Sorry, and patching is the only way that your anti-malware systems, even the way that your OS is structured, or your operating system is structured, that's how you fix known vulnerabilities, is through software updates. And as we mentioned before, technically the attackers could have gone straight for Target because they had poor patching problems as well. But because of an outdated anti-malware software that was used, Phasio Mechanical, their credentials were just taken because they were using an older malware that was already known, and they already had fixes for them as it was. And then of course the last one that sticks out to me, number 10, log monitoring. The log and monitoring. The attackers they thrive on not being detected. Poor logging and monitoring allowed for the attacker to take over an account, escalate it, and then move across the network without being noticed. To prevent this, we have to be more aware and monitor the life cycle of an account. So if you think about the life cycle of an account, it's created, it may remain at a certain level over time. Maybe the person who owns the account gets a promotion, so you give them authorization and escalate their privileges, or de-escalate their privileges. People leave companies all the time, or even go on extended vacations. So maybe these accounts need to be put in a temporary disabled mode, like when they're on vacation, or permanently disabled and deleted when someone leaves an organization. But if you have these dormant accounts that still can log in, that's another method to not be noticed. If you are not logging, hey, this account that's been dormant for 3 years, why is it being used? If you don't question that, then the system is like, oh, cool, another user. Are they authorized? Oh, they gave me a good password, and it's up and running. And it's like, okay, oh, they escalated their credentials. We're not going to question that. And then that's how the attackers for Target, they were able to move across that network without being noticed because they weren't logging these things. They weren't monitoring the life cycle of the account itself. Not until it was too late. Okay. So using these controls, we're going to try to put this together with risk assessments, and as I mentioned earlier, Target used the risk assessment to determine where their vulnerabilities lied, and then they needed actionable methods to increase their security, which is a security control. You can do this. There are methods to do this without having to go through what Target did. NIST 800 TAC 30. It was developed to provide a guide to perform a risk assessment. And the purpose of a risk assessment is to identify, estimate, and prioritize an enterprise's operations. It's used as a way to evaluate security posture of the enterprise, and then apply those controls. So the NIST 830 provides a list of 18 security control families that you can apply after the risk assessment has been done. But really, the risk assessment itself is a part of a bigger picture called the risk management lifecycle, which is here. And actually, the assessment is at the bottom of step 4. But if we just go around in the circle, step 1, we're going to classify our information systems. Step 2, we're going to select the security controls, and this is from the NST 18 categories. We're going to apply security controls. We're going to implement them, assess the controls, then we're going to authorize them into our information system, monitor the security controls, and if based on any of these steps that you need to apply more controls, or focus your current controls in certain areas. That's why it is important to do assessments after you've applied controls, because it's not a one and done. You don't apply controls and call it a day. So we have to consider that in risk management, an attacker is always going to try to develop a way to break in, which means we as security professionals should be doing the same or something similar. We should be developing ways to meet them and beat them, which means it's going to be a continuous cycle. There might be a new threat that may arise where an organization or an enterprise may have to apply a control that they've never used before. Or you might find that there's too much focus on one and you need to change your focus on another. So obviously it's going to be specific to the organization itself. And I'm sure if you were to do an assessment on Target today, you could still probably improve on some of the controls that were recommended after their initial assessment, after the data breach of 2013. Now, before we close out, I do want to talk about security culture. I feel this is important because of what I mentioned with the risk management lifecycle. Security should be a culture within the company. It should be a part of the enterprise business architecture and not a secondary system that's put in place for compliance to regulation or an attempt to give clients and stakeholders their warm and fuzzy. On the screen, I have a visual representation of a security policy. So on the top left there, security policy codifies security goals of the enterprise or of leadership in order to support its constituents to modify their behavior, which is supposed to produce cybersecurity. So the point of a policy is to change the behavior of the employees in order for cybersecurity to be produced or another way to put it is so that the security posture is where the security goals of the company are. But as you've seen from the target examples, a policy is not enough. It really starts. It starts at the boardroom. It starts at the top, and that's the concept of tone from the top. Leadership and managers of an organization, they determine the direction that the company is going to take. You could have all the policy in place for compliance, but if you drive, say, sales and profit, you'll care more about efficiency. And for most companies, let's face it, the primary function of their business doesn't require security to be present. What's more time efficient? Turning on a computer and getting to work, or turning on a computer, then typing a password, then getting to work? So there's an extra step, and seconds add to minutes, add to hours, add to days, so on and so forth. And I would say from a security standpoint of view, what's more costly? The time it takes to type in a password and maybe a second form of authentication, or stopping all work because the network just got hacked, the server had to be taken offline, an outside company had to perform a risk assessment, systems had to be cleaned and overhauled, patched up, new equipment installed to reconfigure the network. Then before the network is taken back online, you have to perform training and make everybody change all their passwords. So was that worth not already having that security control of a strong password and a second authentication already in place? So these are risks that have to be considered when thinking about the operation of your business. Now in 2015, a company called Praviti, they showed a direct correlation between high board engagement, or a board caring about security, and good security practices. And I had already mentioned, which is further down the slide, that policy only codifies the goals set forth by management. And really, if governance and enforcement is what's going to make a policy work, it'll eventually drive the company culture into one that includes security. Because if your leadership shows that they care about something, the members won't necessarily care from a personal perspective, but they will actually show attention to it because they see that leadership cares. And that was back to the talk about efficiency. If leadership cares about efficiency and not security, your employees are going to focus on that. Versus if they say, hey, we want to be efficient, but we also want to operate in a secure manner, and here's how, and here's why, and we're going to practice certain security practices. We're going to do security training. We're going to have an incident response team. We're going to require that you use passwords in a certain way. We're going to limit your access to the network. We're going to limit your access to certain folders or certain parts on a server. In order to access this information, you're going to have to have permission from a manager to do it, things like that. So government enforcement and the use of security controls will drive the culture of security and solidify desired security posture. And that thus ends our presentation. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. And the last two slides are our references. Thank you, and you have a good day.